This is talk number 29, if you have your notes. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 12 through 18. Let's pray together. Lord, we do pray now that you would help us as we consider another detailed passage in your law, a law about those who are at the very bottom of society. Help us, Lord, to have your heart and to understand your purposes and your will. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter 15. And while you're turning there, I will remind you that last time we looked at Deuteronomy in the broad. We looked at chapters 14 through 16 to locate this piece. And there were four ligatures that go all the way across that hold this piece together. The first one is the calendrical rhythms, that there's a day element, there's a year element, a 1 year element, a 3 year element, a 7 year element. And so Israel was held together by certain calendrical rhythms, and we'll come back and look at that when we look at the Constitution. Secondly, we saw that all these have to do with some sort of social support. You had the tithes for the orphans, the widows, the aliens, and the Levites. And you also had the festivals 3 times a year in which everybody, including the slaves, and that's where we are, we're talking about slaves, were to go, or the manservant and the maidservant. And it was a time of great feeding, a time of not working, obviously a time of worshiping the Lord, but these be times of great renewal, and you were to bring your slave along to this, and he was to prosper from that. And then thirdly, we saw that all the way through it says, if you obey the law, you'll be blessed, a very clear Deuteronomic motif. And then fourthly, we saw that God has already blessed Israel, and Israel is to respond in keeping the law because they've already been blessed. Now that's what we looked at last time, and that's the large fabric into which this piece is woven. And it's a very specific piece. So I want to look at this. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 15. If a fellow, verse 12, if a fellow Hebrew, or if a brother Hebrew, a man or a woman, is sold to you, or sells himself, the Hebrew could go either way, and he serves you 6 years, in the 7th year you must let him go free. So this is the head note, this is the law. The rest is explanation and qualification of the law. So we want to ask about this, and I want to go back again and revisit the question of social location. Who's he talking about? And where are they on the social map? Eventually, we'll take a whole Sunday out, and I will try to draw you a social map of Israel and locate everybody on it. A neighborhood map with the big houses, the small houses, the fire station, the whole works. And we'll try to do a social map. It's a lot of fun to do social map. And I will try. But now we're just building bricks and getting little pieces together, and so you'll just have to have a bit of patience and continue to pay the entrance fee, which is right, isn't it? It's a good price. So people on camera don't know that they're paying nothing, so you can laugh too. But the social location comes from the verse above it, where someone has a debt and they've been forgiven for that debt on the 7th year. But most loans would be agricultural loans. These are not commercial loans, they're agricultural loans, and they're 1 year loans. You've had a flood, a famine, a broken leg, something's gone wrong, your bull has died, and you've had a bad year. You borrow money to get restarted for the next year. It's a 1 year loan, but the next year is a bad year too, and you come to the end of that one, and the person lending you the money says, I need that money back, and you say, I can't pay it. So what happens to you then? And it's not the sabbatical year yet. That may be 3 or 4 years off. You follow that? So if it was the sabbatical year, you wouldn't need Deuteronomy 15:12 because the debt would be canceled. But the sabbatical year is a ways off. You've got to pay off the 1 year loan, and you've got nothing to pay it off with, so you pay it off with yourself. And you sell yourself, or you're sold, or in light of Exodus 21 where we started, you sell a daughter, or you sell a son, or it doesn't ever say sell a wife, so I don't think we should put that in, or you sell yourself, and somebody is sold into debt slavery. And I'm going to use the word slavery, but I'm going to modify it later on. So this person now is at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom. They've gone through all the other safety nets, and they're now at the very bottom. So in terms of social location, we're talking about people right at the bottom. Now, I've tried very hard, and I won't tell you why, but I've tried very hard not to do application. Later I may get a chance to tell you why I haven't done that. But I'm going to step outside the story for a minute and do a little bit of thinking. It's not quite application, but a little bit of thinking about with this. At least right now in America, we're talking a good deal about sex trafficking. It's a form of debt slavery. Now, I'm not terribly familiar with the America scene, although I've been to several of the meetings. But my daughter Elizabeth worked in Cambodia, and we worked in the Philippines, where this is prominent, and not quite so prominent in Africa. But a lot of young girls are sold into what turns out to be slavery. And the reason why they're sold is because the parents have hit the bottom. They've tried this, they've tried that, they've borrowed money, and they just keep sinking. And they're at the very, very bottom. And so in absolute desperation to keep their family from literally starving, they will sell their daughters into debt slavery, and they'll get a bit of money for that. Sometimes they know, probably often as not, they don't know that when they sell their daughter, perhaps it's being said for a job or something, that actually the job turns out to be prostitution. They may or may not know that, but they sell them. But what I want to say here to help us think about this is the reason why they sell their daughters is not because they don't love them. They sell their daughters because they're desperate. And they're desperate because they're absolutely poverty-stricken. And then I want to take it a step further. And I want to say the reason why they're poverty-stricken is not because they're lazy. That just doesn't work. I mean, I've spent most of my life living overseas, and I can tell you that people in the majority world are not lazy. They get up at 5 in the morning, and they start work at 6, and they work until the sun goes down. And they do this 6 days a week, and in some cases 7. They're not lazy. They're not lazy. So the answer of Proverbs, which is partly lazy and partly oppression, you've got to be careful about that, and we'll have to ask about Proverbs' social location when we think about that answer. But at this point, I just want to suggest to you the reason why these people sell their children is their extreme poverty, and the reason for their extreme poverty is not laziness, it's injustice. And it's structural injustice, almost always governmental injustice, which very quickly filtrates into the business world. Certainly true where I've lived overseas, that you can't do business without paying bribes, either to the government or to the business or to both. And you can't prosper, especially the people at the bottom can't prosper because of the unjust system. There's no such thing as a level playing field. No such thing as working hard and pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. That is absolute mythology when it goes to the majority world. Right? Just doesn't work at all. And it's that kind of world which Deuteronomy is talking about. So a close sort of footnote, parenthesis here. So when we think about this text, at least in modern terms, one form of debt slavery is sexual trafficking. Now, the literary structure, and I thought about this morning, and I thought, I'll say to them, look at the notes and look at the Bible at the same time. But then I realized I couldn't do that. So I'm going to read the Bible through for you. What I've tried to do in layout format is to get some sense of how the clauses relate to each other. And so let me just talk a bit of grammar this morning. Verse 12. This is the main clause. If a fellow Hebrew, if a brother Hebrew, a man or a woman is sold to you, and he serves you 6 years, in the 7th year you must let him go free. That's the main statement, the main clause. Now we have adverbial subordinate clauses that modify these statements. The first one talks about how you're going to release him, verse 13. When you release him, here's how you're to do it. It's adverbial. Do not send him away empty-handed. Rather, put something in his hand. Supply him liberally from your flock, your threshing floor, your winepress. And then another adverbial clause about how this giving should take place. Give to him as the Lord your God has blessed you. And then another adverbial, they're not exactly clauses, well, I guess they are clauses of sorts, but it's modifying that main statement again. And also remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why I give you this commandment today. Now, the Bible doesn't have footnotes. But if it did, verse 16 would go into the footnotes. Oh, by the way, there's an exception to this. Huh? Or you put it in parentheses. But you don't get that kind of stuff in Hebrew nor in Greek. The text just flows. And so it seems like it's being interrupted, and in a way it is being interrupted, but it's a parenthetical statement. But if your servant says to you, you say, I'm going to release you. And he says to you, I do not want to be released, because he loves you and your family and is well off with you. Then take an awl and push it through his earlobe in the door, and he will become your servant for life. Do the same for your maidservant. Then back to the main story, and this is probably another main clause that's parallel to the opening one. Do not consider it a hardship to set your servant free. This release, don't consider it a hardship, because his service to you these 6 years has been worth twice as much as that of a hired hand. And the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do. So the central organizing thought of this paragraph is release your slave at the 6th year. And everything else is modification of that, and talk about that. Now, I want to go through and very quickly pick out 7 little pieces in the text and look at them exegetically, that is, try to explain them, and then at the end find 4 major themes that are more foundational for our understanding of justice. But first I want to look at some of the exegetical bits, and we'll go through them in order. 15:12. If a fellow Hebrew, and we've looked at this word Hebrew before, Hebrew, and there is some scholarly debate whether this is an ethnic term or whether it's a socioeconomic term, meaning migrants who are poor, or it's some combination in between. My own take on this is that it's not exactly an ethnic term, because Israel was not an ethnicity. Now, I'm going to have to be careful here, I'll get myself in trouble. There are genealogies, especially in Chronicles. And so there is what's called primordial ethnicity. That is, you trace your ethnic identity back through your family lineage. But there is also very clearly in the law, and we'll come to this eventually, that Israel is made up of people who are in allegiance to Yahweh on the basis of his covenant and pledge themselves to keep the stipulations of the covenant, which are the law. And if you pledge yourself to Yahweh and your name is Ruth or Rahab, you become an Israelite. And stepping outside the story, you become a great-grandmother of Jesus, right? You know these things. And so Israel is not exactly defined in the Scriptures as a bloodline. It has bloodline, sons of Abraham. But it's not just bloodline, and you can get in without bloodline. And so Hebrew here probably has a sense of one who's committed to Yahweh, but it probably also retains, because of its use in this context, the sense that the Apiru, which is close to the Hebrew, were migrant poor people. So it's probably people who belong to Yahweh who are at the bottom of the pile. Then it says, 15:12, if a brother Hebrew, a man or a woman, the Hebrew actually says a Hebrew man, a Hebrew woman. And this is interesting because Exodus 21 did not make explicit that women were involved. Exodus 21, 7 through 11 says you can sell your daughter and she becomes the concubine or second wife of this person, and that's a permanent relationship, not broken on the 6th year. Only it's broken and a release is effected if he abuses her and doesn't fulfill the marital rights. But this is viewing a different woman. This is not a woman who's being sold into concubinage. This is a woman who has been sold or sold herself into 6 years slavery to pay off a debt. And so you have the man and the woman discussed together on equal grounds. And if you noticed, at the end of verse 17, Do the same for your maidservant. So the man and the woman are treated on equal footing here. Now, this is not the place to do it, but I'm paying attention to three major issues in the text, but I know well that there are three major issues in our world, and you know it too. I'm paying attention to slavery. Now, you've got to think in the big world to do that, but we should all be world Christians and think of slavery in the big world, and Lord knows how many millions of people are enslaved today. About women. What about the women issue? And then about aliens, or to translate it, immigrants. And so, I mean, this is an electric text, and you've got to be careful not to be shocked by it, all right? So, I mean, we're dealing with the central issues of our day. What do you do about those people who are being pressed at the bottom? What do you do about women? What do you do about migrants? And the text will address all these, and you see the little piece about women. I won't take it any further because the text doesn't really take it any further here. Then the next thing to observe is the seventh year. We're still in verse 12. If a brother Hebrew, a man or a woman, is sold to you and he serves you 6 years, in the seventh year you must let him go free. Now, where does the 7 come in? I want to suggest that the divine rhythm is a very different sort of dance. Now, I don't dance at all, so this doesn't bother me in the least. But it's an interesting step. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, I've never seen a dance quite like that, and I'm sure I couldn't do it if there was such a dance. But it's got 6 beats and then a rest beat on the 7th. And so the divine rhythm, the divine dance is 6 beats, work, 7th beat, rest. And undoubtedly, that's where this comes from. But while it picks up the rhythm of the Sabbath law, it's not a sabbatical law. That is, in chapter 15, verses 1 through 11, it's the sabbatical law, and so it's a fixed 7th year. It occurs every 7 years in a cycle. It's a matter of time. Whereas this one, the clock starts ticking from when you hire the person. But it's picked up that divine rhythm of 6 and then 7. And it follows that, and no doubt it's picking up the flavor of the Sabbath. And when we get to the laws, the Constitution of Israel, we'll talk a great deal about Sabbath because that clearly is the major underpinning for the Constitution. Now, the meaning here is that you release the slave on the 6th year, which means that there's no chattel slavery in Israel among Israelites. Now, I'm going to not say anything more about that because I'm going to come back and pick that up in the concluding section, section 5. But just to say it here, if you release the slave on the 6th year, there is no permanent chattel property slavery. These people are something else. You send them out, but you don't send them out with an empty hand. All right? Look at verse 13. Verse 13 says, and when you release him, so we have the law, and now we're going to discuss the conditions of the laws, how this law works. When you release him, do not send him away empty-handed. Rather, supply him liberally from your flock, your threshing floor, your winepress. Now, I want to chase this business of empty-handed. I've written it out for you in your notes. If you don't have the notes, you can turn back to Exodus chapter 3, verse 21, and let me read you this passage and listen for a word. I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, when the Exodus comes, and you get out from underneath Pharaoh, that oppressor, the one who enslaved you, you will not go out empty-handed. And it's exactly the same Hebrew term, rekam. And here's what you're to do. And this is really interesting. I've never really thought about this, but I'm going to think about it with you today. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in the house for articles of silver and gold. Oh, it's starting at the top of the pile, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, we just cleaned out my dad's house, and we found a little bit of silver dollars, and if there was gold, we missed it. But, you know, we were looking for silver and gold. There wasn't very much. Articles of silver and gold and clothing. Now, Now, clothing was not cheap in those days. Which you will put on their sons and daughters, and so you will, and this is probably the right translation, you'll plunder the Egyptians. You'll spoil them. You'll strip them naked. These are different translations. You're going to go in and ask them, and they're going to give you gold and silver and clothing and probably everything in between. Exodus 11:2. Tell the people that men and women alike, it's not just going to be the women, are to ask their neighbors for articles of, here it is again, silver and gold. How'd they get away with that? The Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and Moses himself was highly regarded in Egypt by Pharaoh's officials, no, not Pharaoh himself, and by the people. God moved in the heart, so when they asked, they gave them silver and gold. 12:35, we get it again. The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and clothing. And the Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them what they asked for, and they plundered the Egyptians. Isn't that interesting? And God saying, do you see what's coming? God saying, when you came out of Egypt, I worked on your behalf so that you as slaves would not only be released, but you would go out and you would have in your hands a half a kilo of rice? No. Silver and gold and clothes and everything else in between. I mean, they despoiled them. They simply took it all away. I'm tempted to use some words that will get me politically in trouble, but I'm refraining myself from that, all right? Now, the word liberally is also an interesting word, and when you release him, do not send him away empty-handed. Supply him liberally. It's a very rare word, and I'm going to quote from it here. I'm going to read you the Hebrew text first of all. Supply him liberally. The word, you see it, anak, is actually used twice in most languages. You simply double a word to make it strong. That's certainly true in Hebrew. It's certainly true in Tagalog. And so it's anak. You supply him liberally from your flock, your threshing floor, and your winepress. Now he's talking to this master and saying, when you, like God, bring people out of slavery and you release them, just as God was liberal with you, so you are to be liberal with them. And I base that on this comment by McConville, who observes that anak is based on a word meaning garland or necklace, a rare term that expresses honor and even extravagance. There is perhaps a memory of the jewelry that was part of the rich provision of the Israelites by the Egyptians when they released them at last from slavery to go into the bounty of their own land. So this liberally probably has the same idea that when you send them out, God was not stingy when he sent them out. God was a liberal. And when we send the slave out, we're not to be stingy. We're to be a liberal. Yeah, I'm having a little fun. I can see you're having a little fun too. Usually that's a bad word, isn't it? But I think I like being a liberal, at least for a while. And when I send my slave out, I want to be liberal. I want to act like God. Now, why do I do that? Well, 14 is going to amplify on this and says, 14b, give to the slave as he goes out, as the Lord your God has blessed you. You know, 20, 30 years ago, forget how, in 1993, whatever this, my wife and I sold our house, and we got it in a bit of a mess. Our realtor accepted 2 bids, which is not to be done, and we lost money, and the lawyers made a lot of money, and finally, after sleeping in an empty house, my wife came and joined Deborah and me. It was a miserable experience, and I remember saying to Dolores, what I don't suppose we'll ever be able to have a house again. Because, you know, we sold our house, we sold everything in our house, we took a big loss on the house, and we became missionaries, and we took a huge cut in pay. And I said, Dolores, well, that's, you know, when we go home, we'll get a good tent. Hope it doesn't leak, or we'll live in a trailer, or we'll rent an apartment. Now, if you come visit me, and I hope we can organize a party where you can come visit me, my beautiful, it's not a big house now, 1,200 square feet original, my beautiful house with hardwood floors that reflect the sunlight and a porch that's all glassed in. And while we weren't looking, someone put a pond in behind our house, and it's got fish in it. And so I sit every morning on my glassed-in porch looking out at the sun because it faces east. Isn't that nice? And hear all the birds fishing for the fish. And boy, have I been blessed. And even this morning, when I got up early this morning and walked across that hardwood floor, I don't know what it is about that hardwood floor, but it does me a lot of good. And I said, Lord, I thank you for the hardwood floor. Are you thankful for hardwood? If you don't have a hardwood floor, as I recommended, I know someone who can put one in for you. But that hardwood floor, I said, Lord, I don't need a hardwood floor. I've lived all my life on concrete floors, painted with red paint. That, of course, comes up on your feet. But, I've always lived on concrete floors in Africa and the Philippines, and even in Scotland, I lived on concrete floors. I mean, I don't need a hardwood floor, but I've got a hardwood floor. Boy, am I blessed. Do you feel that way? Let me ask you, don't raise your hand. Don't even need to raise an eyebrow, but you could raise your soul. Are you blessed? Now, when you deal with the people subordinate to you, and so I'm dancing off the edges of the text, all right? When you deal with the people subordinate to you that make their living off of you, and I suspect almost everybody in this room has that relationship, except Samuel. He's too young. And he just lost his job, poor guy. He's on the other end of the stick, so we can pray for Samuel. But the rest of you have employees. Even as a poverty-stricken missionary in Africa, I had 7 employees. I had a gardener, I didn't pay them very much. They didn't work very much, but, it was a nice relationship. We all lived. But those people beneath you, how are you to treat them? If God's really blessed you, you don't need me to fill in the blank, do you? You see how I should treat the people beneath me. Give to him as the Lord your God has blessed you. And then remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. So God is calling the Israelites to behave as he behaved. He's blessed them in the past. He's blessing them in the present. And the very last verse, and I'll read this here at the end of our passage, verse 18, and the Lord your God will bless you. So it's blessing in the past, blessing in the present, blessing in the future. Man, I mean, my dad died 3 weeks ago today. And I'm sad. And we're still grieving the loss of Dad. But I want to tell you, my dad's got it a lot better than I do. I have arthritis. My dad doesn't have arthritis. I forget things. Well, Dad rarely ever forgot, but he doesn't forget anything now, right? I have indigestion. My dad has 3 big meals a day and doesn't even burp. Oh, I bet he was at Hardee's this morning, and he probably had 3 coffees, and Lord knows what else he had to clog up his arteries. And blessed, will be blessed, am being blessed, will be blessed. And these are the motivational factors for me in treating those beneath me. Now, there's another piece here, and I'm just going to mention it and then come back to it a little later on. The end of verse 15. That is why I give you this commandment today. I'm giving you this commandment today because I've been generous with you, and I want you to be generous with others, and that's why I am, and it's the word command. It's one of 5 or 6 words used in Deuteronomy that have to do with the law. Commands and statutes and ordinances and laws, they're all the same flavor, and this is one of them. So this is a matter of law, and I'm going to come back and work on that a little bit more in the conclusion. Now the exception to this law, very quickly, verse 16. But if your servant says to you, I don't want to be released. Now, this is not Southern plantation slavery. This is not Southern plantation slavery. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later. But, they were given their freedom, and they say, no, it's better for me to stay with you, my master. Because, and then you see what the text says? Can you believe it? I mean, the text says it, so I have to believe it. I do not want to leave you because you pay so well. Well, maybe, but he says, because he loves you. And he loves your family. And he's well off with you. It's not just that you pay him well, but you've got a good relation with the subordinate. He loves you. I wonder how many employees in family-run industries in America love the family that owns the industry. Probably a good doctoral dissertation, wouldn't it? Probably couldn't get published, but you get your PhD and go on. It'd just be interesting to know, wouldn't it? I wouldn't even ask it of the corporate world, but at least family-run businesses. Do they love Mr. Smith, who owns the Smith & Sons Corporation? It'd just be interesting to know, wouldn't it? I don't know the answer to that. But this is an amazing statement. He says, I love you, and I don't want to leave. And the guy says, all right. And so he makes him a permanent slave by the awl, which is a sign of obedience and membership into the family. And he really moves into the family and is part of the household. We talked about that last week, about the extended family. Abraham had an extended family that was at least 318 servants. You know about that. But they were part of the family. He circumcised them, which means they were part of the covenant. And so he had to treat them as brothers. We'll deal with that later on when we come back to Exodus 12:48 and some other texts. Now, just as a final push, the author of Deuteronomy knows that there may be some resistance on the part of employers to let their employees, now I've slipped into modernity and I'm not quite sure that's right, on the part of masters, on the part of servants, to let the servant go because that servant has really produced. That servant is above average. So do not consider it a hardship to set your servant free because his service to you these 6 years has been worth twice as much as that of a hired hand. And so you're going to be resident. You're going to say, no, I'm not going to release them and give them, liberally to help them go. No, and the Deuteronomy says, no, don't say that. Don't balk on this. Don't drag your feet. Let them go if they want to go. And if you do, the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do. Now, having looked at these things exegetically in some detail, and there are other bits and pieces that I didn't look at, I want to very quickly make 4 observations that are broad and foundational and are the kinds of things I think will help us to move to application eventually. The first thing is that they're called brothers. Now, it gets obscured in the NIV. If a fellow Hebrew, it's if a brother Hebrew, and all the other translations tend to make it a brother. I don't know quite why NIV went to fellow, but if it's a brother Hebrew or a sister Hebrew. And so what you have here is a very clear statement, and the English Standard Version says, if your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you, and so on. The first thing to note is that the brotherhood here includes both a man and a woman. It's not just the men who are brothers, it's also the women. So it's a sisterhood and a brotherhood, and they're both incorporated in that sort of understanding. The NRSV says, if a member of your community. I suppose that's all right, but brother, there's something about brother that's worth holding on to. Second, I think this becomes the foundation for treating servants well, is that they are brothers or sisters. I think this is bedrock. How do I treat the people beneath me? And the acid test of character is not how I treat my boss. We all know that's yes, sir, no, sir, whatever you say, sir, yes, sir, how high, sir, shall I jump, sir, whatever you say, right? We've all been there. Huh? Some of us are still there. Nice being retired. Now I only have one boss, and she doesn't push me too hard. But, we know to treat our bosses, but how do we treat the people beneath us? That's the acid test. I had the unpleasant job of hiring people when I used to be an administrator. And what I tried to find out was how they treated people beneath them. How do they treat their subordinates? That's the acid test. Not how they treat me. They're going to treat me fine. But how they would treat the people beneath them. And so the idea of family, of brotherhood, is the bedrock for this. And God says the law is basically built on treating people as brothers and sisters. And it does have a biological sense to it, but in Deuteronomy 22, 1 and 2, let me read it for you, has a metaphorical sense, which is pretty clear. If you see your brother's ox or sheep straying, do not ignore it, but be sure you take it back to him. If your brother does not live near you, or, listen to this, if you do not know who he is. Well, now, wait a minute. How can he be your brother if you don't know who he is? It's because all Israel are brothers. And obviously you know the brothers who are nearby who are blood brothers. But everybody in Israel is a brother because they're all committed to Yahweh in the covenant, and that makes them covenant members and makes them a brotherhood or a sisterhood. And so I treat everybody, even those to whom I'm not related, even those that I don't know, I treat them as brothers. And so it's that sense of brotherhood that is absolutely foundational and colors all my relationships. Isn't it interesting how we relate to each other? I mean, we've all been to conventions and to other meetings, and we introduce ourselves, and people introduce us. And Dr. Wood, he studied, say, this is the sort of games that my tribe plays. And it's just interesting. But at Next, one of my African brothers, who was almost my age, but had been my student, so it made it very interesting how he would relate to me. He was a colleague, but he'd been my student. And so he always called me Brother Wood. And I thought that was really pretty good. Brother Wood. And I called him Brother Hoptu. Even though he'd been my student. You with me? And that just, it laid the foundation for how we treated each other. When I was in the Philippines, my students, after they graduated, decided they would call me Kuya Chet. Kuya is sort of the honorable term. It means honorable uncle. So I was Kuya Chet. And that was nice because it was a family term. And I related as family to these people. And so the vision that it begins to emerge of Israel and how it works together justly is that at the foundation of a just society is the deep and profound sense of brotherhood, of sisterhood, of extended family. Now I'm trying very hard not to preach and to get into too much application because we'll drown, but let's sneak up on the continental shelf and look over. Do the people at Ford Motors address each other as brother and sister? No, they don't do that. They don't do that. And nor Chrysler, nor at General Motors. And even Toyota. Well, no, Toyota's a different fish. And we'll come to that another day. But they don't address each other as brothers and sisters. So, when you start moving these texts, you've got a lot of things to think about. Second observation, no slavery in Israel among the Israelites. The idea that you can only be enslaved or be a servant for 6 years puts an end to lifetime chattel slavery. There was no such thing as chattel slavery among the Israelites. Now, I think, and it'll take me a couple weeks to come back to you and say this with a bit of clarity, I think that makes Israel unique among the nations of the ancient Near East. We know that Mesopotamia was highly stratified. You can see that in Nakota Hammurabi. We've talked about that a little bit. Israel is not stratified. Everybody's a brother. All Israelites are brothers. Now, next week I'm going to take up Leviticus 25, which says you may buy and sell foreigners and make them slaves, and you may give them to your children as property. Oh dear. Yeah, at this point, I wish I was a liberal and could just take a red pen and scratch that one out, because I'm not quite sure what to do with that one, at least not yet. But within Israel, no such thing as slavery. Now, let me just step back a bit and think with you. This is not application to us. Something, somewhere, went terribly wrong in the evangelical, theological thinking of the pre-Civil Year Wars, because some of the greatest theologians of our time, people I read as textbooks as a Bible college student, who are revered masters, were pro-slavery. How did they get there? How did they get there? Well, I mean, you go read Mark Noll's book, he'll help you on that. But I think one of the suggestions is they took a text, isolated, out of context, picked it up, brought it over, and dropped it down and said, see, proof texting. But if they had tried to understand the whole of how Israel worked, they would have understood that God was creating a society in which there was no slavery. And it's for that reason, as Mark Noll points out, many of the southern plantation owners were very reluctant, although they themselves were Bible-believing, God-fearing, born-again Christians, they were very reluctant to get their slaves saved, because if they saved their slaves, or Jesus saved their slaves, then they'd have to call them, you see the problem, don't you? And they didn't want to call them brother or sister. Yeah. But you see, that brotherhood's a broad, foundational statement that runs all the way through and holds Deuteronomy together. And so what we're looking for here is not bits and pieces that we can sort of transfer across and say, there, and there, sort of pin the tail on the donkey type of exegesis. No, we're looking for big picture and try to create the big picture and then understand how the big picture and its deep values, brotherhood, give some light as to how we might behave. No slavery in ancient Israel. Number 3. And I've done this before, but let me do it again because, well, it's right there. Let me show you the verse where I find this. Look at verse 15. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why he gives you this commandment about releasing them and sending them out liberally, with their hands full. Sending them out with their hands full. Well, let's start back here with God. When God released Israel from slavery and brought them out and sent them out with their hands full, we've seen that Exodus 6:6 describes that in very precise language as a mighty act of justice. It's a justice act. God is not doing charity. God is not saying, I've got a world vision here, and I'm going to develop these Israelites. They just need to learn how to fish, and we need to get a few ponds put in here. No. This was an act of justice. Retributive against Pharaoh, distributive for Israel, brought them out, gave them these things. How could he give them the silver and the gold? Because they deserved it. It was their delayed wages plus interest. They weren't robbing them. They were simply finally getting paid. God was balancing the books through an act of justice. And now when the servant leaves and you send them out with plenty, you say to your wife, I've been such a good person today. I've acted very charitably. No. You have obeyed the command. And for that, God will bless you. You'll have hardwood floors. God will bless you. So the release of the slave is an act of justice. God's answer to the kind of poverty that forces mothers in Cambodia to sell their 12-year-old daughters into what's going to be prostitution, even if they don't know it, is poverty. And that poverty is created by structural injustice. And if I want to stop sex trafficking, I've got to chop the tree down at the root. You with me? Spraying poison on a few of the branches is not going to kill the tree. I've got to cut the tree down at the root. You say, that's political activity. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're likely to go to a cross in Jerusalem and be nailed to it if you engage in that kind of activity. No. That's what it means to be a prophet. So this is not an act of charity. It's not an act of development. We mustn't be led astray by King Jimmy and 1 Corinthians 13, which says charity is the best of all things. The word really is love. And love and justice, love does not replace justice. Love motivates us to do justice. If you love me, keep my commandment. All right? So they're friends. They're friends, but they're different. And so love does not replace it. And of course, Leviticus 19 knows all about loving these neighbors, but it's in a context of doing the law of God. Now, finally and quickly, Israelite masters are called to act like God, to be bringers of justice to the marginals. I think I've said that pretty clearly. That God says, I have put my hand in space-time history, done a mighty act of justice, released you from slavery, sent you out without your hands being empty, but rather with your hands being full. And now I call upon you to act toward those who are subordinate to you, who are enslaved to you, to release them on the 6th year, and to send them out not with an empty hand, but with a full hand, silver and gold, if you please. And if you do this, I'll bless you.